Hello, everybody. Cal Griffin here. So let me do my disclaimer, and then I'll get into my whole thing here. Yeah, here in this on this podcast, do not acknowledge any religion, politics, identity topics, or hot button topics that will cause a problem or hot button. And if you visit, if you're asked to not, and you continue, you will be without question, without another warning, be ejected from the room without warning. With that being said, good afternoon, good day. If you're just waking up or coming from a different dimension from time travel, I hope you're having a good day. So, what I want to broach on today is how our past can affect how our views are in the present, and how, in a way, that may shape our views, our self worth, self acceptance, and general outlook on life and reality. So, in Jediism, part of part of it is dealing with our past. But on the other side of it, not everybody does. And it kind of wants to be, well, just meditate on it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing on meditation. I think meditation does a whole lot of good things. I do it. And my students do it. And I highly recommend it because there are multiple benefits. But however, what if that is just not enough? What if one doesn't know how to deal with their past in order to change how they see the present? Because what we've been told in a way about ourselves in the past can affect our attitude, can affect our relationships with people, can either A, drive us to addiction, hypersexuality, can put us into bad relationships, or just not want to be in relationships at all, and maybe be anti-social. Because if one is told they're this, or this is your problem, or you're treated badly as a child and growing up, that's going to dampen and slow down progress one can make otherwise. Because if one is told that you shouldn't do this, but really has a problem and it's ignored, or just thrown aside, then later in life, what is the perspective and perception of that person, that child that turns into an adult? How are they going to see themselves? How are they going to see what they may accomplish? They're going to be slowed up by this. And and I will agree on the other side of this that maybe somewhere along the way that child might have been influenced by something. So there's two sides here to this. Okay. One, social pressures may lead one to believe, act in a certain way. Or you might have a family, or maybe you got in a relationship that really was not very productive for happiness and for cooperation and to get along for the future. But however, though, it starts somewhere, right? It's got the idea has to be put in our head at some point. Okay. And not everybody is wanting to deal with that. And some people think that they have the magic pill to solve your problem. And that be just meditate. And in my cast, I've talked about how we need to reflect on things in order to address them. And some people say, oh, I don't need to. I've reconciled with my past. Either you truly have, or you don't want to actually face what is holding you up today because it may be too painful. Or if it by chance opens old wounds, it may cause more trauma. And you relive it again. This is a double edged sword. And there's two sides to this. One is if you open those wounds back up, then you can address really what has been buried. And then you can heal from it. You can get better. On the other side, maybe you open something up that might have been best left alone. Kind of goes with sometimes things being unsaid is the best way, is the best policy. So, in a way, there is a judgment call on it. But if you are just genuinely afraid because it gives you a excuse to get attention, because it was a way for you to get attention, then that's going to be useful for you. But if you're using it as an excuse and a reason to not socially adjust, then, my friend, you have work to do. And you will be better for it. But on the other side of it, if you're somebody that thinks they can teach somebody how to work through this without you really knowing, you're going to do more harm than good. And so you've compounded the problem. And this also goes along with there are people in the community that they themselves are would-be harm doers that have other motives that are predatory. So we're looking at a couple of things here. And yes, steps are being made for some of this. And on the other side, people need to understand that if you sign on to this and you really want to change, there are going to be things that are going to be uncomfortable for you. Anxieties, self-doubt. And if one stays in those because of inflicted damage, then you're going to not really progress that far. You're going to constantly forget what you've been taught, what you've learned. Like, for example, when I was a instructor at a functioning order, I went into another group and saw a posting from a student that was there who wanted to go through the training. And there may have been some deeper issues, problems, buried things that were not addressed. Or they might have been using an anxiety as an excuse to not do it, or they genuinely did not want to let go in order to progress. Because I read a post they had made. They are scared. They are in fear of the changes going on. And they were reminded what happened to your training. Remember it. So we have a couple of things here. And I know I've touched on a couple of things that I'm skipping around here. However, we also can go too far. We can go too far in doing what was done in the past and just ignoring things. But remember, when you sign on to grow, you sign on to be better than you are, you have agreed to the terms. You have agreed to change. You have agreed to become better, to improve. And always going back to the past has no room for the future. Living in the past does not make room for the future or the present. So, in a way, you can be self defeating. So, I guess in a way, make your choice, right? But on the other hand, if, say, your mentor, your master, or your group that you're with, or even if you're solo in your development, and you ignore these things, you're not really doing yourself any good. But on the other hand, you can get to a point of where, well, I did it, so you can do it. And this is what happened, so it should work for you. Not the case. Everybody wants to do a blanket general solution. And there are people in the community that haven't done the work, real work, and they become predators because they haven't become honest with themselves. And their motives are for their own perversions. So what I guess this is saying is the community still has a long ways to go. But on the other side of it, we can also police each other. We can also not be afraid to speak out and to stop those that are those that harm. And sometimes diplomacy, though for the majority works, but sometimes diplomacy is the shortcoming. It's the long way to avoid the inevitable, which is either the person finds another way to worm through the process, or they get stopped where they need to get stopped and how and when. And I don't know if this is really making sense today. I'm throwing thoughts out here, but also observations.
I have a thought.
Sure.
Earlier in the podcast, you talked about meditation and how, like, maybe it's not addressing the issue. But I think also with that, it depends on the perspective that you're taking and whether or not you're actually doing things to address those issues in the first place.
Yeah.
you can be so focused on peace and the good stuff and just maintaining being in that all the time that you're not actually addressing what you need to. Or you can use the skills from meditation to maybe be a little less comfortable, maybe get used to or address things that you need to in that, and also do other things outside of it to actually do better.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Because, and that goes to, we get into Jediism, we start walking this path to become better, right? And if you're not addressing it, you're not going to. But if you're using it to actually let yourself listen to the Force and let those problems be revealed to you, like one should, then you will get better. And but here's another thing, is that we stay in that what we're trying to get away from because it's familiar, it's comfortable. It's a way to draw attention to ourselves. It's a way to still live in a victim mentality, which says you haven't gotten yourself ready to accept moving forward.
Some people will be so focused on peace that they will stay in chaotic environments and not actually go through the steps that they need to in order to have actual peace.
Exactly. And staying in the past is the way to not have peace. Always reflecting back to it and referencing to it is that enabler that doesn't let one move forward.
But learning to let go and maybe reflecting back on the past, but using that to address how we're carrying ourselves now and not lingering in it is a better option.
Yeah. And true, we have to dig that stuff up to deal with it. But on the other side of it, if it's always being a reference and during a conversation, which is that? Is it for a topic or is it to draw attention to yourself? Is it pertinent and relative to the topic? Or do you just want to be the center of attention? Because
Sometimes that can also be someone trying to look at things from a different perspective, but also learn a new way of thinking in that.
okay, so you're talking about processing.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then let's look at processing. Processing is what? Thinking about what was discussed.
Sorting
happened?
through it,
Yes.
trying to figure out how else can I change my perspective in that? And when my perspective changes, how does that affect the current way that I'm looking at life now?
Yeah. But how do you know if it's actually working?
And it depends on if you're doing the work or not.
Yeah. You can do the work on paper. How do you know if someone is actually doing the work and there's a noticeable change?
When there is a noticeable change?
Yes. And when someone out of insecurities is always speaking up, they quit speaking up because they have become comfortable, because they are in a or have become more comfortable with whom they are. So insecurities decrease. Trust becomes more plentiful. And people make excuses to how come they don't change. There are some things within us that just won't. But, personalities, little traits passed down from our family that are just we're born with. Okay. When inherently are not bad, can actually be very good traits. And for example, if one has a tendency to just, when they've had enough, to go, and what they say is very honest, and getting to the heart of the matter, might irritate people. And I know in today's society, we've got all this unrest going on. And frankly, some things aren't being addressed as they should be. But yet, you have opposition to that. Well, change isn't always fair. If you want to change, you have to quit putting that mentality aside. You have to quit using that mentality. Because, quite frankly, life isn't fair. Life waits on no one, and it doesn't care. Well, but in this, when one is on the road to getting better and they have indeed actually connected with the force and they are doing the work, then everything and the quality of life you live becomes better. But in a way, this is a choice. It's a choice to stay where you are, or it's a choice to move forward. You know, there's this saying that, matter of fact, Julie here had said from studies that she's been undergoing in Buddhism, you ask for your own suffering. And more
Something
time,
along the lines of that.
huh?
Something along the lines of that.
Yeah. So, and how I understand that is that sometimes we keep ourselves where we are because it serves a purpose. one purpose is to not let it happen again. The other is to keep yourself from not changing.
In life, there is also change.
Yeah. Either way, you have a choice, and pain is inevitable.
Something about that thing where we cause our own suffering is our expectation that in life there shouldn't be change and that we ourselves shouldn't need to.
But isn't that called complacency?
It causes suffering.
Yeah, it does. It's also called arrogance. It's also called your ego. It's also called I know better than. Well, if you know better than, then why are you still having trouble?
It's like someone going, I know, I know, I know to every suggestion given, but never goes about actually implementing the changes and living it out. They're just saying, well, yeah, I know that. I just haven't done that yet.
I know is a phrase used to get somebody to shut up. It's a way out. It's a scapegoat because you don't want to actually address the real issue. I know, I know. Well, why don't you know that doing this self-reflection is what's going to help you progress? Yeah, I know. Well, if you know, why hasn't it been done? What are you holding on to that you don't want to address? And yet complain about everything else around you, which I would dare say is your own perspective. I really feel like crap, so everything else around me is crap. You're asking for your own suffering and your own worldview. Now, I know I was going to follow through and keep going with this month being men's mental health month, or men's health month. But I think this also goes along with it. So we have to be willing to address fearlessly, bravely, and with courage what holds us back. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to change everything about themselves, and overnight. And some things never will change, even though they desperately want them to. And so they have to learn how just to live with that. But with this also, don't project your own shit onto other people. Might get dinged for that one, but don't do that. Don't project onto others. Don't make your problem theirs. They're not responsible for it. They're not responsible for your own growth. You are. some people say, well, I haven't been able to connect to the force. What have you not been doing? Or are you just unable to? And granted, there are people out in the community that cannot. But that doesn't mean they still can't do the work. It doesn't mean they can't meet expectations and hold themselves to a standard, just like everybody else. But we were talking about the I know, I know, I know. If one knows truly, then they will know how to
Then
get
they need,
out. They will know how to get out of their own way.
they need to empty their cup.
Yes. But when one says I know all the time, they're not ready to empty their cup or they don't want to. And there are consequences to that as well. In a lot of ways, all of this is about consequences, good and bad. And contrary to belief, not all consequences are bad. Consequences is another word for results, the byproduct.
Cause and effect.
Yes.
Interdependence.
Yeah. But with interdependence, do you keep depending on those things that are unhealthy for you?
Sometimes it just talks about like connection.
Yeah. Connection. What though? What are you trying to stay connected to?
I guess that would depend.
Depend is subjective.
When you
Are you
talk
talking?
about cause and effect, you're talking about a network of interdependence that everything else affects everything else.
True. But that in itself is generally subjective, is it not?
That goes back to a universal truth that everything changes.
Okay. But here, this exactly right here is what they call circular thinking. Circular thinking is not letting yourself go outside and not be shown the errors, the flaws which one has, the actual realities, the actual truths, the logic that shows the lacking. The lack of willingness, the lack of fortitude to move forward, to be okay with not knowing everything. I know, no, you don't know a damn thing. Or if you did, why are you here? To learn. That kind of dismantles the circular thinking of we ask for our own suffering and that there's a universal truth. The universal truth is actually what exists, actually what is. Proof simply by its existence and the results. Yes, there is a philosophy in this. There's a philosophy in that. It's easy to know the words. It's easy to say the words, to sound good. It's even more difficult to enact those words, to live that universal truth, to be that universal truth. We can study everything we want to be that book of knowledge, to be that book of resource. But unless you're willing to actually change, the resources are no good. You're just as ignorant as you were when you started. The experience of the work and the change proves the knowledge. I found out
There
something.
are three different kind of philosophies that come from China specifically. You got the Taoism, which is experience. You got Confucianism, which is mostly study. And then you got Buddhism, which is incorporating both.
Okay.
And all of them teach some similar topics on how to get to the end goal, but they have different ways of doing that, and they will have disagreements on which one is the most effective within the times that they were established.
Yeah. So let me ask a question here. How long does one spend on contemplation?
That is what Confucianism often got very spoken out against at a certain time, because it was a time of a lot of scholars and scholarship type work instead of the whole sitting down in contemplation and meditation and actually working on things. But when
Right.
Buddhism came around, it combined things from Confucianism and Taoism, and basically created a path of we're going to sit, we're going to contemplate, but we're also going to do things in daily life.
Yes. Which makes the work valid. Because if we don't do the work, like I was saying, we can be that.
It's one thing to have book knowledge, it's another thing to actually experience what that knowledge is about. If you just have book knowledge, you can just talk about it. If
Yes.
you have experience with it, you can actually do it. But sometimes you need to know that book knowledge before you actually go about the experience part.
Right. And you're actually, in a way, saying what I was saying. But which means that goes into what's known as a parody. Okay. And though there's nothing wrong with that, and it's something to go by, it's something to learn from, it's something to learn by and live by. And sometimes setting all that down and just letting one go through it, and just simple phrases of "this too shall pass," "this is only temporary," "things happen for a reason," and right now, this discomfort has a reason. I must experience it, and it will be temporary. Yep. In Jediism, people like to throw around all these philosophical terms, okay, and look and sound very deep. And that's not bad in a way. That has some real validity to it. And those that sound and they look and appear knowledgeable, look like a guru, generally have a lot of work to do for themselves. And in doing so, without doing the work, are harmful to others. So, and there are those that in a very short time can gain great progress simply because they're doing the work. Or you can have those that have been in the long term duration and haven't grown one bit. Maybe the person that wanted to be pushed didn't have what it took to do that and to be that, simply because of their own failures in the past. And we all live with failures of our past. We all live with those things that haunt us. And that does take time. But we also have to limit the time it takes. And the funny part is that the more we improve, we find that we still have a long ways to go. But knowing the difference. Knowing if we actually have changed. And we will know by how we see things, how we think, by what we do and how we respond, and what we respond to. And that's all true. But we have to allow it. We have to want it. We have to have the desire for it and the passion for it. And I've referred to the Sith Code on this thing a few times here, all right? And yes, there are some Jedi that do not want to touch that code. It makes people uncomfortable because of what it may represent. Or should I say, those that represent it have deeper problems. They have deeper problems, which keep them in a place of resentment because they're unwilling to let go. And there's a few people in this community that are quite dangerous. because they're unwilling to recognize their own flaws. And they're unwilling to recognize their own flaws. And so they're dangerous to others. They're dangerous to the community. And yet they cry victimhood. They're a victim of their own making. And I know in these podcasts, I poke the bear on occasion. I poke the hornet's nest. I put a stick in it. Yes. One needs to. That hornet's nest and that bear needs to be agitated on occasion. But in which manner one pokes it makes the difference. Do you burn your bridges? Or do you poke it because it's something that needs to be addressed and that's been ignored? I think the latter is the more productive. Poking it because it needs to be addressed in a productive manner. But in the manner in which it's poked also makes a difference. Do you want to just be that jerkweed that just says something in a self-righteous fashion? Or do you want to be the person that goes, hey guys, we need to sit down at the table here. We really need to look at this because this has gone on too long. And excuses aren't working anymore. And that's going to ruffle feathers. It's supposed to. It's needed. In the Jedi community, when I came to it a little over 10 years ago, I needed something that was better than me. I was lost. I needed to find something that helped me find a way. I'm not a religious person. I don't work well in that. So in the middle of that, I noticed if I'm going to look for something in this that's going to help me, then why is it such a mess? Why haven't these things been addressed? Some of it also comes down to on this, the leaders, those that set the example. Those that set the standard. But also the rest of us that need to accept those standards to live by, to practice by. And we have to do that because we have to take out our own trash. No one is exempt. No one gets the hall pass and get out of jail free card. And if you think you are owed that, then you're going to be in for a long, hard road. You're going to be put in some deep, dark hole somewheres in an order and not see the light of day. And I mean that metaphorically. But there are those, and there is an individual, which I have learned about that I've had my experiences with, that they are kept away from others, which is good because they are a danger. And I'm glad to hear that. But however, one's own suffering has been asked for, and they have thus received what they've been asking for. I know that's a bit cryptic, and I digress. So, in this, I guess what I'm saying is individuals and as a community as a whole, we all have to wake up eventually and smell the coffee and put that mirror up in front of us. And I know I am quite the cynic and I'm very cynical in these podcasts. But a lot of this comes from the work I've done with myself. And not to toot my own horn, but the reality is I am a pretty good person at going ahead and dealing with things, dealing with the issues I face and have faced. Because we have to be willing to accept change happens. It's necessary, it's needed, it's healthy. And sometimes that's not always fun. But let me leave you all with a thought here. And this hour has already blown by. How many of us and how many of you have actually really looked in the mirror and have been pointing a finger to avoid your own needed work? If that be you, uncover your mirror. Step up to the plate. And you'll see how much better life is. The reality sucks, and life may not seem so happy, but there is peace. I know that sounds contradictory, but however, there is peace in knowing reality. There is reassurance in knowing what actually is out there, knowing who you actually are. I know there were a couple of things here I didn't touch, but I'll come back to that next podcast. But basically, in a way, accepting who you are is realizing I need to change. And then in some ways, there are things about you can change, provided you want to and want to take the trip. With that being said, Cal Griffin out. Thank you very much. May the force guide you. Take care.